Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Ray Tampa Podcast. Our podcast offers bold commentary on various subject matters with a laser-like focus on the truth. My name is Ray Tampa, and I'm the host of the Ray Tampa Podcast. We have in our studio, well, generally we have two talented and intelligent gentlemen, but one is missing today. Russell Cato is missing. So we have Jamie Wilson III, my co-host. Also, we have with us Pastor Clarence Williams, Mount Zion AME Church, St. Petersburg, Florida. Pastor Williams is here to discuss with us the issues and concerns involving the care of the burial sites at the Lincoln Cemetery. These issues and concerns have been the subject of discussion for many years. I'm going to share with you all some excerpts from an article written by Mr. James Schnur and published in the Gabber magazine, April 2nd, 2022. The article also appeared in the Weekly Challenger newspaper. Mr. Schnur begins by stating, quote, "Residents of Gulfport have had an interest in the fate of Lincoln Cemetery for many years. Established in 1926, there's a general and incorrect assumption that Lincoln was the original cemetery for African Americans on the Lower Pinellas Peninsula." End of quote. This opening statement, in and of itself, allows for the development of several questions that we'll get to later on. In continuation, Mr. Schnur's article states, quote, "The story of Lincoln Cemetery is complicated. Controversies over Lincoln's location, condition, and operations stirred vigorous debates long before Vanessa Gray began volunteering her time to care for the graves. They raged decades before this Gulfport woman established a nonprofit corporation, Lincoln Cemetery Society, and took possession of the cemetery in February 2017, end of quote. As of this day, Pastor Clarence Williams's nonprofit, Cross and Anvil, is officially in control of the property. To begin, we ask that you, Pastor Williams, share with our listeners where you were born and educated.
Well, I was born in Bartow, Florida, near Lakeland, over in Polk County, what used to be Imperial Polk County. You can look that up and find out what that means.
Okay.
But I'm a lifelong Floridian. I went to Knoxville College in Knoxville, Tennessee. And of course, I've had seminary courses at Howard and at Atlanta and at various places on my 41-year journey through this thing.
Okay.
Came to St. Petersburg 25 years ago as from a church in Tampa. I was in Tampa. This is all what we would call the West Coast Conference in the AME Church, part of the 11th District, which is the state of Florida, led by Bishop Frank Madison Reed. Approximately 534 churches in Florida in the 11th District, including the Bahamas, where we just came from. So we've been here for a while in the community doing the work and getting to know the people. And the community has been very kind to me, my ministry, and the church.
Right. We're very fortunate to have you, and you know how I feel about that. One of the top pastors in our community. So I appreciate the information. Pastor Williams, what do you know about the original development of Lincoln Cemetery? As stated earlier, Mr. Schnur's article indicated the cemetery was established in 1926. By what group or by what individual?
Well, I'm not sure that I know the answers to that, Ray. I do know that as a result of Jim Crow and the egregious racial laws that were in place in Florida at the time, it was illegal for blacks to be buried next to whites. This necessitated a separate burial ground for the African American citizens. And many of us were too young or had been born yet to remember when Black people could not go to the hospital, which necessitated Black hospitals in the communities that could afford them. St. Petersburg was one of them, Mercy, and Jackson in Miami, which went on to be a great hospital that it is today.
Mhm.
I know we had a county hospital that was in Bartow, the county seat where all of the indigent and African-American people went. And as a result of that, these cemeteries were licensed by the state to some degree to carry out the burial duties of those that had passed away and needed to be interned somewhere. But because there was no funding, many of these grave sites, after the cemetery was closed, that means that there was no more plots to sell. It's not a revenue generating facility anymore. They became mismanaged and became,
Neglected.
neglected and not maintained. And to some of the city's credit, there were just no funds there. What happens in a regular cemetery, and I say regular because I think that it is under 15 acres, owned by schools, municipal governments, or nonprofits, they are allowed to operate without having what they would call a perpetual fund. The big cemeteries have what's called a perpetual fund, and every internment puts a portion of that cost into a pot that is supposed to have enough money in it to maintain the cemetery after the cemetery closes, so that things like this wouldn't happen.
Okay, great. Pastor, tell us, if you don't mind, how you initially became involved with the Lincoln Cemetery.
Well, I was approached by then Representative Wingate Newton some years ago, and the city of Gulfport mayor, and I don't remember his name now, and one of the councilmen, Fedovich, I think Michael Fedovich was his name, about putting this cemetery that had fallen into disrepair again and had not been maintained, but was owned by a private citizen that controlled it under my nonprofit. And I was very reluctant at first, but they pressed me, and after seeing the condition of it, I really felt that our community, we have a responsibility toward those that are entombed there. But even more moving for me was when I found out some of the people that were there. This cemetery changed hands quite a few times. There was a group involving Peter Rudy Wallace and some other people, as you know, the former Speaker of the House that's from this area, and several other people. The last one to own it, and the one that really made the map that we are using today, was McRae. He controlled it during the last time that the cemetery was actually revenue generating.
Are you talking Don McRae?
Correct. Or his father.
Or his family?
Yeah, his family.
Okay.
I don't want to misspeak.
Right.
But he's the one. Matter of fact, his signature is on everything. He had the deeds which show that he had it at some time. Yeah. And then he released it into the hands of some other people. And it ended up being in the hands of, and I don't know if I could use his name, but a gentleman from Atlanta that conveyed it to me.
Okay.
At the same time that was happening, Vanessa Gray had been approached by someone, and Peter Rudy Wallace released his interests to her. Now, it's a lawyer's word. There's a possibility he didn't have any interest, but if he did, he's releasing them to her.
Okay.
And McKinney did the same thing for Cross and Anvil. So the deed was cloudy, and I didn't remove Cross and Anvil because I felt like if I did, the property may be in jeopardy of being sold. or something happened to it that would not, in my opinion, reflect the wishes of the peoples whose family members were there and what was in the best interest of Southside St. Pete. I turned over the records to her, which I had the records. I turned them over to her in a meeting because I did not feel at that time that the community consciousness was at the point where they were ready to engage. You know, Ray, and we could talk about it later. One of the issues with the cemetery is no individual should have control of it. It should be a community controlled piece of property. My goal was to establish that and have, different components of the organization doing different things. And we could talk about that later, but that's how I initially got involved in it. It took, we met for 3 years, going back and forth with lawyers. We had some lawyers doing pro bono work, trying to secure the deed. And what happened was the nonprofit that owned the property filed dissolution, but they did not convey the property. What Florida law says is if a nonprofit accrues assets at the dissolution of that nonprofit, before the dissolution of the nonprofit, all assets have to be conveyed to another nonprofit. You just can't leave them dangling in there. That part was skipped. And to try to undo that was a monumental task. And when we got to the end, other people got involved and it got messy and I backed away.
Okay, well, with this next question, I think you've given me some parts of the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What were some of your initial plans for the cemetery? Some of your initial plans for the cemetery?
We had contacted some people from the Veterans Administration about the possibility of doing a turnout right there off the Pinellas Trail, which is on the north side of the property, to commemorate and to acknowledge and remember those war heroes that are in there. And I call all of them heroes because they died protecting our country.
Correct.
We have a Civil War, there's a Civil War veteran there, one Purple Heart person that's there, and many other people who serve with dignity and courage. And I felt like that would be a nice little thing to do for them. Also, we had talked to some of the people that were in charge of the school board then about the possibility of, and I don't want to put it out publicly yet, of having them partner with us to help make some changes with the entrance that would involve giving up some property in a parking lot that they had that was adjacent to the south side of the property, so that we could have the entrance change from where it is now to the back. One of the things we felt like we needed to do, and this is when a lot of people raised their eyebrows, I felt like it was necessary to do ground penetrating radar to actually determine where the bodies are, where the graves are. A lot of people may not know, and I didn't know until we researched it, that the topsoil moves. And the headstone may be a foot, 2 feet away from the actual vault. Now in the main cemeteries, of course, they move them. They have them all marked. They know where everything is. But that cemetery has been there for many, many years, almost 100. And to my knowledge, that has never been done. So it's very difficult to find the final resting place of people, even those that have headstones. So the headstone may be, quite a ways from the actual vault. The trees have compromised some of the vaults. The road is in disrepair, and there's really no building and no clear road to keep you from running into some of the vaults, which are very fragile and causing issues there. And when I wanted to do that, I was not going on a witch hunt trying to find out who was there and who wasn't there. We do know that because there was no death certificate required for the death of an African American, many cemeteries throughout the country have found bodies that people just killed and put them out there. And with no record, there's no record. When the records, actually, there was no legislation that provided a birth certificate for African American up into, I think, late 50s, maybe 40s or 50s. If people were like me, I was born by a midwife because we couldn't go to the hospital. I think all of my family was, except my young sister. She was actually born in a hospital. So because of the lack of records, Ray, and the lack of upkeep, it's a monumental task to try to get your arms around this cemetery. So what I had planned on doing was setting up a society that managed it while I go out and lobby for funding. I felt like that was my strong piece. I approached Vanessa about continuing to do the day-to-day because you don't just need the grass mowed. You need to sustain that property. That means funding. That means allocations from the state and the federal government, in my opinion. My opinion is that these cemeteries exist because of the egregious laws of Jim Crow. That being said, I believe they should have the same consideration as the Black institutions have gotten over the years to, have the federal government walk away. And I believe that they are seeing that now because we're seeing pockets of money begin to develop because people have raised the consciousness. The nation's consciousness has been raised because of the Crumb Building and other grave sites in Tampa, New York, Washington, D.C., where these sorts of things have happened. And basically, there's been nothing done about it. So that is part of the issue with the Lincoln Cemetery. It is not a revenue generating piece of property, and it requires a lot of sweat equity and a lot of work to be done. So this is not something that's going to take a year or 2 years or 3 years. That being said, to have an individual controlling it, I thought was counterproductive. What we really need is input and buy-in from the county, the city of Gulfport, city of St. Pete, all having people that serve on the board, along with some stakeholders in the community, like NAACP or whatever, institutions that are advocates for our community, along with some of the members of the people whose loved ones are there. That way, no matter who comes and goes, there's always an active, viable organization providing oversight for this organization.
This is all great information because if I remember correctly, last week, Jay, didn't you mention somebody in your family is there?
I got their grandparents.
Grandparents. My dad was put out there, and if somebody said, Ray, I'll give you $2 million if you were to go out there and show me where your dad's burial site is, I wouldn't get a nickel of that money because I can't do it. Now, I spoke to Vanessa Gray. And for our listening audience, I want to talk about Vanessa so you know who we're talking about. Vanessa probably is about 25 years old now, but she was in the paper, Waveney and Moore, a reporter for the Tampa Bay Times, did an article about Vanessa Gray and her passion for working out in the cemetery. She would go out and she would clean up grave sites and do this and do that in terms of trying to bring dignity to some of these grave sites. I read the article that Waveney Ann Moore wrote, and she indicated that Vanessa found areas where bones were exposed, even a skull was exposed. And this is because of the weather, the trees uprooting graves, and nothing that someone did. It was the environment causing some of the damage in that cemetery. But the bottom line is, according to the article, she was able to put those bones back in the grave site and the skull and to try and do another interment, so to speak, cover them up and so forth and so on. So she had a passion as a little girl. As a little 5, 6-year-old girl, she would go to that cemetery as a place for solace. But the bottom line is, I just wanted to let the listeners know who she is. And I heard you mention that you and Vanessa had many conversations
Yes.
about the cemetery, and you want her to be involved from the standpoint of the day-to-day. Is that still
Yes.
what you want to do?
Let me just start by saying we owe a great debt of gratitude toward Mrs. Gray.
Excellent.
Right.
Excellent.
If we're going to talk, let's talk.
Yeah.
She put a lot of work in, sacrificed, I'm sure, some of her own money. She does have the passion, and she did the work. I think I would say to her, thank you. She is not leaving. You know, when I was an athlete, I ran the relay. And I wasn't that fast, so I ran the second leg. But, you know, when it was my turn, the man that ran the first leg gave me the baton. I think she's passing the baton.
Okay.
And one day we're going to do that. And so I would say to her that she's done her work well. She has paid a tremendous sacrifice. Sometimes in the court of public opinion, there's been a lot of negative and unkind words said by those who were angry at her or whatever reason. But I would say that she has done a great job. And on behalf of a grateful community, I would say thanks to her. And I just hope that she would be able to continue to run the day-to-day operations. We are planning on having space for her to have an office up at Cross and Anvil.
Awesome.
She could do
Awesome.
the work. And my advocacy toward finding funding so that she doesn't have to do that. She could just concentrate on beautifying the cemetery and bringing it back to where it ought to be. The cemetery itself poses a lot of challenges from a practical standpoint in terms of cleaning it, because you have to be very careful with heavy equipment in there because they will collapse. And not knowing where everything is makes it a lot more difficult. So a lot of the work that probably traditionally would be done by heavy equipment, we're going to have to find other ways to do it. And I'm not exactly sure what that is. But the law does allow for us, if a grave is opened, to put it back as best we can and put it back. So the young lady did nothing wrong. You said it during the hurricane, trees uproot. 100-year-old tree had roots running under the vault.
Right.
It turns over, the vault pops up, and you got these remains everywhere. The law allows a cemetery caretakers to take care of that in a manner that still dignifies those that are entombed there.
That is awesome. And I'll tell you, the title of this particular podcast is going to be Bringing Dignity to the Burial Site, Lincoln Cemetery. And you spoke about the dignity and bringing that back in what you just said. I want to point out the fact that the students at Boca Ciega High School, along with their teacher, wrote a book of chronicles about the cemetery. The teacher walked her class from Boca Ciega High School over to the cemetery, 5-minute walk, to inspect. Some of the students were amazed and shocked at what they saw in terms of the disrepair and the neglect and all the unflattering things about the cemetery. It was an excellent 200-page book that they put together as a result of what they saw and what they did in the cemetery. So I would like to say, Pastor, thank you for taking the reins. Thank you for bringing the attention that your profile brings to the situation. I received a call from some individuals that were working at the cemetery asking me to get involved. And I mentioned to them that I just couldn't do it. I didn't have the time and I didn't want to fake it. If you don't have the time, just say you don't have the time. And that's what I said. So I have to respect all the individuals that are putting forth the time and effort to make something positive happen at that cemetery. My dad, as I said, is there. I have no idea where his grave site is. I understand that there are about 4,000
Yes.
unmarked graves.
Yes.
Unmarked graves.
Well, some of them are marked. There are 4,000 people total there. Some of them are marked, and I don't know the exact numbers. Last time I had the records, I believe there were about 64 people who have not died yet, who still have to be buried there. When a cemetery closes, those that purchase plots before their death, those plots have to be designated and held until they pass. Well, the problem is because of the moving of the ground, you literally have to go out there and find that there are individuals that are good at it, where the gap is between one burial and another, and try to get it down where it belongs.
Jay, do you have anything you want to ask?
Question. So you mentioned funding, and you also mentioned ground penetrating radar to help assist you. So currently, there's nothing that the state can do or is doing.
I think there is. One of the things that I believe in is timing. I believe a few years ago when we had an opportunity to do this and things kind of went awry, the timing may not have been right. Now I believe it is because of what I mentioned before about the consciousness of municipal governments. I think some of that has made its way to Tallahassee as well as Washington. So there is funding out there now. There are grant funding and other types of funding that are available. The problem with that is the applications are very cumbersome and very restricted. And I think that is, what we're going to have to try to overcome because they want records, but we don't have them.
All right.
And, these cemeteries, again, are going to have special consideration. I think instead of doing everything by mail, that the officials from Tallahassee and from Washington do exactly what that class did. Go out there and look.
Right.
We're not making this stuff up.
Yeah.
This is not somebody trying to take $1 from you.
Right.
Even though you gave all that money to 45 and his buddies, but we'll leave that way it is. And we don't need near as much.
And in the meantime, and this is just a thought, in the meantime, why couldn't the Black churches as a collective do little donations or help it until this funding is? Yeah, and the answer to that is there is no reason. But let me say this, not just because I'm a pastor. I'm gonna say this for my friends. This is my 41st year. I'm winding up. I'm gonna let these young, smart pastors have it. That's not our job. That is true.
We feed the hungry. It's not our job now. We advocate for those who can't speak for themselves, but that's not what we do. The church's job is to promote the gospel and to evangelize the community. Now, we have to be careful because who fulfills the church's obligation while we fulfill somebody else's? And I think the church should have an interest, and they are stakeholders because the church's members I have many members that are buried there. So I don't think the churches need to be benign.
Right.
But this is a municipal government, state of Florida legislative issue and Congress. This is an issue that is bigger than the churches in St. Petersburg. Now, I think the churches should have input. They should, do whatever they can, because you're not talking about the money to raise one offering. It's going to evaporate in a week. You need to sustain that with funding that will be appropriated every year, like a college or something else is given money every year, so that we don't have to go chase dollars.
Right. For
the caretakers to chase the money, it encumbers their ability to do the work. So, if you get a 10-year bucket of money, you don't have to do that.
Pastor, I want to say to you, my God, thank you for being here.
Thank
You've
you.
offered us a lot of information about the cemetery. And I have some other questions, such as what's the next step, but we don't have the time.
Right.
Being that the case, I again say thank you to Pastor Clarence Williams for being here. I want to thank my co-host, Jamie Wilson, for being here, offering the insight into his questions. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in to the Ray Tampa podcast, 99.1 FM, The Bird, each and every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. And we invite you to go to YouTube, type in the Ray Tampa podcast, and you can see them all. Finally, sponsorships are welcome. And with that being said, good evening.